Hi everyone, I'm Chris Van Tulleken. I'm a professor of global health and infectious disease at UCL. I'm an NHS clinician, an infectious diseases clinician, and I'm also a children's television presenter, as some of you may know. I'm going to talk about, not about ultra-processed food so much as the ultra-processed food industry, which is to say the transnational commodity producers, the retailers, and the processors of most of our food. And I'm going to talk about that industry as a driver of synergistic pandemics of malnutrition and obesity, which then create physiological vulnerabilities to the third pandemic of climate change. And I'm also going to try and show how this industry is the barrier to change. I'm really interested to see how this sits alongside what Runa Christopher said, and I really valued your talk. I speak with a very different voice. My talk is much more about having the fight. But I do want to say before I begin, it's extremely important to have people who aren't having the fight as well, which leaves me to have the fight. Quick declaration of interest. I don't take any money from anyone who, any industries that directly affect human health. I do make money from a book, and I'm a BBC presenter, and I sit on 2 WHO expert committees. In summary, really, if you take away only one thing, it's that obesity and diet-related diseases are, in this country, I'm going to talk mainly about a UK context, primarily commerciogenic. They are driven by commercial incentives, and if the commercial incentives are the engine, then the conflicts of interest that are generated by the industries are the lubricant to that engine. In this sense, food and tobacco companies are comparable in terms of their actions, their incentives, and regulatory approaches we might look at. But the same applies to many of the industries that are driving the problems that we're discussing here today: fossil fuels, alcohol, gambling, automotive, agribusiness, and so on. I'll skip through these. We spend a quarter of our life in poor health in the UK. A quarter of children aged 10, roughly, live with obesity by the age of 10. Over the last 30 years, obesity has gone up by 700%. Severe obesity has gone up by 1,600%. And this goes hand in hand with stunting or malnutrition. So in the UK, children at the age of 5 are very significantly, noticeably shorter than their peers in North and Eastern Europe. So we're living in an emergency in the sense of something requiring immediate action. But we have been living in this emergency now for more than 2 decades. What is our theory of obesity? I'm going to pick obesity, but we could say this about diet-related disease. I don't believe that nationally we really have an official explanation for this. Another way of framing that would be, why are we eating excess calories, sugar, saturated fat, and salt? There's no question that those are the primary drivers of diet-related disease. But we don't seem to have come up institutionally with an answer about what has driven the excessive consumption, or nothing that really makes sense. Inactivity is often proposed. Almost all of the literature proposing that inactivity is the primary driver of population obesity was funded by the sugar-sweetened beverage industry, really by Coca-Cola. Willpower is often cited. This is US data. That's 1955. This is 2000. These graphs are the same for Black, white, and Hispanic groups, men, women, all ages. Everyone starts gaining weight in the mid-1970s when the food environment switches from people cooking food at home to predominantly eating packaged, industrially processed goods that are high in fat, sugar, salt, and energy density. We formally, or a way of formally defining these foods is using the NOVA classification, the definition ultra-processed food. It's not the only way of discussing them. It's 11 paragraphs long. It boils down to packaged goods that you typically find you find an ingredient you wouldn't find in a domestic kitchen. More than 98% of these foods are excessive for energy, saturated fat, salt, and sugar, according to our UK dietary guidance. Okay, and some of this has been published, some of this is unpublished, work done by my group at UCL. Some is really obvious. A lot of it is sold as healthy. It is 60% of our calorie intake in the UK comes from ultra-processed food. And the evidence applies to a dietary pattern. So you can't look at a product and go, it is unhealthy because it's ultra-processed. That's not what the evidence says. What the evidence says is if you eat a dietary pattern of UPF, or industrially processed food, it causes, and I'm going to say causes, negative health outcomes. So we have preclinical and clinical studies on the properties of UPF. on softness, on energy density, on texture, on some of the additives which probably do drive harms. We have randomized controlled trials on the harmful nutrient content, but also on UPF itself. My group is about to publish the third RCT of UPF versus minimally processed food with nutrient matching. We've got more than 32 systematic reviews or meta-analyses. Now we've probably got more than 100 prospective cohort studies linking a dietary pattern of ultra-processed food with multiple negative health outcomes, including obviously obesity, but also early death. And the big debate in the sort of nutrition community is, yeah, but isn't this just salty, fatty food? Why do we need this definition? Well, I think it's important for two reasons. First of all, in the epidemiological analyses, when you adjust, this is a paper by one of my PhD students, when you adjust for fat, salt, sugar, and dietary pattern and everything else, the negative health outcomes, the effects remain the size in magnitude and significance. And that is also true of the RCTs. So they are not merely fatty, salty, sugary food. I think the way I would put this is there is a double jeopardy when you eat UPF. Every spoonful contains more saturated fat, salt, sugar, and energy than a spoonful of food that you cook yourself at home. But you take twice as many spoonfuls because of the ultra-processing, okay? And ultra-processing is a huge range of different product development and marketing techniques. Plausibility is a big part of establishing causality. It satisfies the Bradford Hill criteria. But the question I would ask is it plausible that industrially processed foods made for institutional investor profit, really made for financialized growth, would not cause weight gain? If you imagine yourself in a product development lab, and I've spoken to dozens of people in product development labs at the big food companies, if you try and make food that people eat less of, you don't keep your job in that product development lab for very long. I've spoken to people at Unilever and Pepsi who use functional MRI in order to develop products. What chance do you stand against that tub of Ben & Jerry's when it's been developed by neuroscientists looking at orbitofrontal cortex responses? And we know that A/B testing in product development groups, the food companies measure how much of the food you eat and how quickly do you eat it, two of the most important properties of any food that drive excessive consumption. The food is engineered very deliberately for profit, and that requires making food that will be consumed to excess. That doesn't mean the companies are evil. They are doing what companies are set up to do, what they're required to do by their investors. So I think the evidence around ultra-processed food is very explanatory. It tells us why we are eating this food. If you don't like that definition, it's still, the evidence isn't about using that definition for regulation. It shows that the purpose of processing is important, and it tells us the problem that we need to regulate industrial power. We pay for this food many, many times over. It's very cheap when we buy it. We've heard about the healthcare costs from Shireen's excellent talk, but we're paying for it in terms of plastic pollution, carbon emissions, environmental costs, antimicrobial resistance, all of the things that go into the food system. The food system that produces this food, this is the only possible output of that food system, and it is the food system that produces it is necessary to make it. So the system that we're talking about needs very, very serious rethinking. Globally, many countries, France, Belgium, Israel, Canada, most South and Central American countries recommend reducing ultra-processed food consumption and regulate ultra-processed food using fat, salt, sugar, and energy. The definitions used by the World Health Organization and the Food and Agriculture Organization to monitor diet quality, this is established science. Okay, this is not globally being hugely debated. And yet in the UK, there is an ongoing debate, I think because almost every institution that might regulate or advocate for UPF regulation has financial conflicts of interest with the companies that make and sell UPF. Financial conflicts of interest are widely misunderstood. They are when an institution or an individual's stated primary interest is in conflict with the stated primary interest of the person giving them money. So let's look at an example with the British Nutrition Foundation, our biggest food charity. Their stated primary interest is in promoting health and preventing diet-related ill health. that is in conflict with a primary interest in making money from selling food that is high in fat, salt, sugar, and energy, as is done by the people that fund the British Nutrition Foundation. And by the way, their Healthy Eating Week in 2023 was sponsored by Coca-Cola, amongst others. Health influencers like me, in my broadcasting role, are some of the most conflicted. This is an email I got last year from McDonald's inviting me to be an ambassador on food and nutrition. And I'm very proud to speak to you today as that ambassador and celebrate. No, I did say no. How do these conflicts work? Sometimes it is direct corruption. And this is actually a study that Paul sent me. There are lots of studies like this. When the meat industry study health effects of red meat, they don't find that it has the same amount of health effects as when independent scientists do. So I would call that, research misconduct and corruption. But most of the time, conflicts work in subtle, indirect, subconscious ways. They just bias outcomes. They shift research agendas. They tell us that the problem with obesity is really we have to study all the inactivity over here when the problem is the food intake over there. They do shape research outcomes. They silence critique, either formally with a contract. When you sign a contract to be a McDonald's ambassador, you say you won't criticize McDonald's, their products, or their customers. And I know that because I see a lot of these contracts because I get them sent to me. But also it's hard to criticize people you take money from. They protect and enhance reputations. The fact that people on our Scientific Advisory Committee for Nutrition, on many of our most august institutions, people I know and love, are in financial partnership with these institutions. It protects the companies. It makes it very hard for someone like me to critique the companies. And overall, they erode trust in science, medicine, and public health. And the result is that this is our current box of Cocoa Pops. There are 12 health claims on this box of Cocoa Pops, in spite of the fact that it has 17% of the calories come from sugar, and it has very little real nutritional value. I mean, I would defer to Flaminia. But this is what, in Chile, a box of Cocoa Pops would look like. The monkey is gone. There is not a single health claim on the box. It would not be marketed to children. It would not be available in hospitals. And it would have two big black stop signs. And those stop signs, I have put them on there using our UK dietary guidance thresholds. Okay, so this is not because we have different nutrient standards. In the UK, our cans of Coke have 3 green traffic lights on them. Coke is 75% healthy. And you know the traffic lights don't work because Coca-Cola voluntarily put them on the can. They're not mandatory. This is what a can of Coke should look like. The interests of the companies are not aligned with public health. Sometimes you think by sitting on the board of the company, by having the company inside your charity, you will influence them. Emmanuel Faber was the CEO of Danone. He tried to realign Danone. I believe he was very sincere in trying to do this. He was ousted by activist investors. The same happened to Indra Nooyi at Pepsi. The same happened at Unilever. If the CEOs can't change the companies because the purpose of the company is to generate value for the institutional investors, you, and I mean not everyone in this room, but we, those of us who are activists or advocates, we will not be able to change what those companies are doing by getting into financial partnerships with them. So until we frame these synergistic pandemics as driven by commercial incentives, and the World Health Organization's commercial determinants group is probably one of the best institutions at doing it. That's one of the groups that I work with. Until we frame it in that way, we will not solve these problems. I'm very happy to take questions later, but thank you very much for listening.